I'm Riley, 20, and my life at university, which was supposed to be a vibrant canvas of new experiences and intellectual growth, had slowly begun to feel like a surveillance tape, constantly rewinding and playing, each frame filled with a creeping sense of unease. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic event, but a slow, insidious seep of discomfort that started subtly, almost imperceptibly, and then intensified, like a volume knob being incrementally turned up on a sinister soundtrack. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. It began with little things, so minor that dismissing them felt like the only rational response. A familiar face in the library, not unusual, but then that same face in the coffee shop I frequented, then again outside my lecture hall. Coincidence, I'd tell myself, shrugging off the prickle of unease that would trace its way up my spine. The campus was large after all, and our paths were bound to cross. But then, the coincidences became more frequent, more pointed. He, a guy I barely knew from a general elective, began appearing everywhere. His name was Mark. He was in my introduction to philosophy class, a quiet guy who sat in the back, never really contributing to discussions. I'd seen him around, of course. University campuses are like small towns. You recognize faces. But soon, recognizing his face shifted to noticing his presence, and then to dreading it. He started showing up at the gym at the same time as me, even though I went at erratic hours. He'd be there when I left my dorm for an early morning run, or lingering near the bus stop when I was heading downtown. It was never direct, never a blatant confrontation, which made it all the more unsettling. It was the subtle way he'd position himself, always within my line of sight, always just close enough to be noticed, but far enough to deny any overt pursuit. The first time I truly felt a chill was when I posted a picture on Instagram of my favorite study spot, a secluded bench by the campus lake. Within an hour, as I packed up my books, Mark walked past, slowed down, and gave me a lingering look, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. My stomach clenched. Had he seen my post? Was he tracking my location? My logical brain fought back, reminding me that the bench was a popular spot, that he could have been there for any reason. But the knot of unease in my gut tightened. Then came the messages. Innocent at first, a simple, "Hey, saw you in class today," on Facebook Messenger. I'd reply politely, a brief, "Hi," thinking nothing of it. But then they escalated. "That's a nice shirt, was it new?" after I'd worn a specific top to class. Or, "Looks like you're having a busy day, just saw you at the library," and then the student union. These weren't questions, they were observations, statements of fact that proved he was watching me, following my movements. My polite replies dwindled to nothing. I started leading his messages on read, hoping the lack of engagement would send a clear signal. It didn't. Instead, his messages grew more insistent, sometimes laced with a passive-aggressive tone. "Did you get my message? Is everything okay?" Or, "I just wanted to say hi. Why are you ignoring me?" The digital trail he was leaving was a breadcrumb path, leading directly to my escalating anxiety. I began to feel trapped, even within the supposed freedom of university life. I started changing my routines, taking different routes to class, avoiding my usual haunts. But he always seemed to find me. It was like he had an internal GPS locked onto my location. The gym, the library, the student union, the coffee shop, even the obscure corner store I sometimes visited for late-night snacks, he'd materialize, a constant, unsettling presence. The psychological toll was immense. Sleep became elusive, often punctuated by vivid, disturbing dreams where I was constantly being pursued, a shadowy figure always just out of reach. During the day, my concentration wavered. Lectures, which I usually devoured with enthusiasm, became background noise to the constant vigilance I maintained, scanning my surroundings, hyper-aware of every person who entered a room, every reflection in a window. My grades, usually stellar, began to slip. My social life, once a vibrant tapestry of group activities and spontaneous outings, withered. I started making excuses to friends, avoiding social gatherings, fearing that he might show up, ruining the evening with his silent, watchful presence. The vibrant canvas of university life had indeed turned into a gray, monotonous film, and I was perpetually the reluctant star of a psychological thriller. My first instinct, after weeks of this escalating surveillance, was to confide in someone, to articulate the amorphous fear that was clinging to me. I chose my older sister, Maya, pragmatic and usually level-headed. We were close, or at least, I felt we were. She listened patiently, nodding occasionally as I recounted the increasingly bizarre pattern of Mark's appearances and messages. I laid out the evidence, the seemingly innocuous but deeply unsettling incidents, the feeling of being constantly watched. When I finished, there was a beat of silence, then a gentle sigh. "Riley," she began, her voice soft, almost patronizing, "are you sure you're not just, overthinking this?" My heart sank. Overthinking? Maya, he's everywhere. He knows where I am, what I'm doing. She waved a dismissive hand. "Sweetie, university campuses are small. And guys, they can be a bit awkward when they like someone. Maybe he's just trying to get your attention." "This isn't trying to get my attention," I retorted, my voice rising with a mix of frustration and desperation. "This is creepy. This is beyond normal." "He hasn't threatened you, has he?" she asked, her eyebrows raised in a way that suggested I was being dramatic. "He hasn't done anything physically, right?" "No, but it's the constant presence, the way he watches me, the messages," I stammered, feeling my carefully constructed case crumble under her dismissive gaze. "Look, I get it," she said, though her tone clearly indicated she didn't. "It's unsettling. But honestly, it sounds like he's just a bit socially awkward. If he actually does something, then we'll worry. Otherwise, just ignore him. He'll get the hint." I left that conversation feeling more isolated than before. Maya, my closest confidant, had not only dismissed my fears but had essentially told me I was irrational, a hypersensitive drama queen. It was a cold splash of reality, a confirmation that my internal world of terror was not being validated by those who were supposed to care. Emboldened by my sister's non-reaction, I tried my parents next during a weekly video call. My dad, always the pragmatic one, listened with a furrowed brow, while my mom, ever the optimist, tried to find a silver lining. "He's just being friendly, darling," my mom chirped, her voice sunny. "Maybe he thinks you're lonely, being away from home. A little attention isn't so bad, is it?" "Mom, it's not attention, it's surveillance," I exclaimed, my voice cracking with exasperation. "He knows my schedule, he knows where I am. He sends me messages saying things like, 'I saw you at the library today, looking very focused.'" My dad cleared his throat. "Riley, I understand it's unsettling, but he hasn't actually done anything criminal, has he? He's not threatened you, he hasn't touched you, has he?" "No, but it feels like he's closing in," I pleaded, trying to convey the pervasive sense of dread that permeated my every waking moment. "It feels like he's always there, always watching." "Well, if he harasses you or threatens you, you go straight to the police," my dad stated definitively, as if that simple instruction negated all my current anxieties. "But right now, it sounds like he's just a bit persistent. Maybe try being a bit more direct. Tell him you're not interested." "I've ignored him, Dad," I cried, the frustration making my voice tight. "I haven't responded to his messages in weeks." "Then he'll get the message eventually," my mom interjected, her tone firm, closing the conversation. "Don't make a big deal out of nothing, Riley. You're a smart girl. You can handle a little bit of awkward attention." The conversation ended with them advising me to focus on my studies and not let little things distract me. It was a complete dismissal. a painful invalidation of my experience. They painted my legitimate fear as an overreaction, a dramatic flare, a symptom of being too sensitive. It hit harder than Maya's reaction, because my parents, my anchors, had implicitly told me that my safety was not truly compromised unless physical violence had occurred. This left me feeling utterly alone, adrift in a sea of unspoken terror, with no one to throw me a lifeline. Their words, intended to soothe, only amplified my sense of isolation and powerlessness. The genesis of evidence, their dismissal, though painful, strangely ignited a flicker of resolve within me. If no one would listen to my words, I would make sure they heard the evidence. I decided then and there that I would meticulously document everything. Every message, every sighting, every unnerving encounter would be recorded. I would build a case so irrefutable, so overwhelming, that no one, not even my dismissive family, could brush it off as mere overreacting. This was no longer just about my fear. It was about proving them wrong, about validating my own intuition and safety. I started with my phone. Every text message, every social media direct message from Mark was screenshot. Some were simple, "Hi." Others were more concerning, like, "Saw you leaving the library at 7 p.m., busy night." The timestamps on the messages were crucial, forming a timeline of his increasingly intrusive communication. I started a dedicated folder on my laptop, meticulously labeling each screenshot with the date and time. It became a morbid digital scrapbook of my eroding peace of mind. I ensured the file names were systematic. For example, Mark message yai memdd hhmmss.png to maintain an undeniable chronological order. This level of detail, I instinctively knew, would be critical if I ever needed to present this evidence formally. Next, I started taking photos, discreetly, of Mark whenever he appeared. This was tricky, as I didn't want to alert him to the fact that I was actively documenting his movements. I used my phone's camera, often pretending to be texting or scrolling through social media, subtly capturing his presence in the background. A blurry image of him sitting at a table near me in the student union, a fleeting shot of him walking past my dorm, a distant photo of him lingering outside my lecture hall. These weren't artistic masterpieces, but they were concrete proof, visual anchors to my otherwise intangible fear. Each photo was timestamped by my phone's metadata and added to the growing digital dossier. I even started to include short video clips when possible, just a few seconds long, to capture his lingering presence or how he seemed to be observing me. These videos, though silent, spoke volumes about his continuous surveillance. I also began to keep a detailed log, a private journal of every sighting, every unsettling interaction, no matter how small. I noted the date, time, and location of each encounter, along with a brief description of what happened. March 15, 9:30 a.m., outside Philosophy Lecture Hall. Mark standing by the tree, looking at me as I approached, then quickly looked away when I met his gaze. March 20, 6 p.m., campus gym. Mark on the treadmill next to mine. Even though there were 10 other empty treadmills, he kept glancing over. April 2, 1 p.m., campus coffee shop. Mark sitting alone at a table, facing my direction, openly staring until I got up to leave. This log became a chilling narrative of his escalating behavior, a chronological record of his obsession. I included details about how I felt during these encounters, the anxiety, the dread, the feeling of being trapped, the constant pit in my stomach. I even made notes about the clothes he was wearing or any distinguishing features, further solidifying the undeniable pattern of his presence. My digital evidence grew daily. Screenshots of his social media profiles, showing how he was connected to mutual friends, giving him insight into my network. Records of him liking old photos on my Instagram, sometimes from years ago, indicating he was deep diving into my online presence. I found screenshots of comments he had left on obscure forum posts about my university, subtly mentioning details about my classes or extracurricular activities. It was a digital excavation of his obsessive tendencies, a deep dive into the disturbing extent of his virtual presence in my life. The sheer volume of the evidence was becoming overwhelming. It was a testament to how pervasive his behavior had truly become, extending from the physical world into the digital realm, blurring the lines of what felt safe. The more I collected, the more the pattern emerged, stark and undeniable. It wasn't just a few isolated incidents, it was a sustained, deliberate campaign of surveillance. The messages, the sightings, the subtle but unnerving indications of his knowledge of my routine, all built a picture of a calculated and relentless pursuit. The evidence was irrefutable, undeniable. It was proof that my fear was not an overreaction, but a rational response to a very real threat. My family's dismissive words, "He's just being nice," or "You're overthinking," echoed in my mind, but now, armed with this digital arsenal, I felt a surge of defiant strength. I was going to show them. I was going to show everyone. The digital cry for help, the decision to post publicly, was not made lightly. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort, born out of frustration and a profound sense of abandonment. I spent days meticulously organizing my evidence, creating a cohesive narrative. I realized a simple post wouldn't suffice. I needed to tell a story, a compelling, undeniable account of what I had been enduring. A thread, a series of connected tweets, felt like the most effective format to present the chronology and the sheer volume of evidence. I wanted to tell my story in a way that unfolded slowly, building the tension and the disturbing reality of my situation with each tweet, much like the way his stalking had slowly built up in my life. I chose Twitter, now X, for its virality and the ability to link a series of posts into a single, comprehensive thread. I drafted the initial tweet over and over, agonizing over every word. It had to be impactful, grabbing attention immediately without giving away the full horror of the situation. I wanted to create a sense of urgency, to make people understand the insidious nature of stalking, how it chips away at your sense of safety bit by bit. I considered starting with a more aggressive tone, but decided against it, opting instead for a factual, almost clinical presentation of the evidence, letting the facts speak for themselves. Finally, late one night, fueled by a potent mix of fear and determination, I clicked post. The air in my dorm room felt heavy, charged with the significance of this irreversible action. The first tweet was a gut punch. They told me I was overreacting about my stalker, so I started collecting evidence. This is what it looks like when someone won't leave you alone. A thread. I attached a collage of some of the less explicit but still unnerving messages and blurry photos. Enough to pique curiosity without revealing the full extent of the horror. I deliberately chose images that were unsettling in their subtlety, to show how easily these early signs could be dismissed. The subsequent tweets unveiled the evidence incrementally, a slow reveal of the nightmare I had been living. Each tweet was a new piece of the puzzle, a fresh layer of the disturbing narrative. Tweet 2. It started subtly, random appearances on campus. Coincidence, I told myself. Then the messages began, always casual, always knowing where I was. I attached screenshots of his initial messages, carefully highlighting the timestamps, showing the pattern of his knowing my whereabouts. I cropped out any personal identifiers from my end to protect my privacy. Tweet 3. He knew my routine, the gym, the library, my favorite coffee shop. He'd always be there. Here's a photo from the library. He's the one in the red shirt, just out of focus, but always nearby. I included the image, a faint but discernible figure in the background, making it clear that this wasn't just a random person in a public space. I emphasized the consistency of his presence, the way he seemed to mirror my movements. Tweet 4. When I started ignoring his messages, they got more insistent, almost aggressive. Did you get my message? Is everything okay? Not a question, a demand for a response, a clear sign of his escalating wan. Obsession. More screenshots, showing the progression of his digital pursuit from seemingly innocent inquiries to increasingly controlling and entitled demands. I noted the dates to show the lack of response from my end, yet the continued barrage from his. Tweet 5. He'd like old photos on my Instagram, sometimes from years ago. A subtle way of telling me he was deep diving into my life. A terrifying invasion of my past. Here's a screenshot of his activity log, showing a like from 2 years ago. This was a particularly chilling detail, demonstrating the extent of his digital penetration into my life, indicating he wasn't just observing my current activities, but meticulously researching my entire online history. It was a digital excavation of his obsessive tendencies. Tweet 6. 2TSEN. The mental toll was immense. I changed my routines, avoided my usual spots, even stopped going to some classes. But he always found me. It felt like living in a constant state of surveillance, a cage of my own making. I included a screenshot of a portion of my personal log, a snippet detailing one particularly distressing day where I had actively tried to evade him, only for him to appear. The raw emotion of that log entry, though brief, conveyed the psychological burden. Tweet 7. I tried to tell my family. They said he was just being friendly, overthinking, that I was traumatic. They told me to handle it. But how do you handle someone who won't be ignored, who makes your life feel like a prison? A raw, emotional tweet that resonated with many. I wanted to highlight the profound isolation and invalidation that victims often face from their closest circles. Tweet 8. This isn't attention. This is terror. This is feeling unsafe in your own life, in your own skin. This is what it looks like when you're being stalked, a gradual erosion of your freedom and peace. A strong declarative statement, shifting the narrative from a personal grievance to a broader issue, defining the experience for those who might not understand the true nature of stalking. Tweet 9. For anyone out there who feels like they're being dismissed, who's told they're overreacting, know that your feelings are valid. Trust your gut. Don't let anyone tell you you're crazy. Listen to your gut. This tweet was a direct call to action, an affirmation for others in similar situations, aiming to empower them with the validation I desperately sought. Tweet 10. I'm sharing this because I refuse to be silenced. I refuse to live in fear. And maybe, just maybe, this will make someone listen, not just to my story, but to countless others. Stalking awareness, my story. The hashtags were carefully chosen to maximize visibility and connect with relevant communities, transforming my individual pain into a collective movement. I hit send, a tremor running through my hand. The internet was a vast, unpredictable ocean, and I had just thrown a message in a bottle, hoping it would reach the right shore. I felt a surge of fear, a wave of, what if this backfires? But underlying it all was a profound sense of liberation, a defiance against the silence that had been imposed upon me. I had finally found my voice, even if it was just a whisper into the digital void. What happened next, however, was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. The roar of validation the first few hours after posting were agonizingly slow. I kept refreshing my feed, seeing a handful of likes and a few retweets from my small circle of friends. I felt a pang of disappointment, a familiar ache of invalidation. Maybe I had been foolish. Maybe it was just another desperate cry into Bo. The void. Destined to be ignored. I finally forced myself to put my phone down and try to sleep, the digital world feeling heavy with my unspoken anxieties. Convinced that my daring act had simply evaporated into the vast digital ether. When I woke up the next morning, my phone was practically vibrating off my nightstand. The notification icon for Twitter was a dizzying number, far beyond anything I had ever seen, a cascade of red numbers indicating an explosion of activity. My heart pounded as I unlocked it, my breath catching in my throat. The thread had exploded. The first tweet alone had hundreds of thousands of likes and retweets. The replies were pouring in, a torrent of support, validation, and shared experiences. "This is terrifying. I'm so sorry you're going through this. Your story resonates so much with me." I was dismissed too. "Thank you for sharing. This is so important." Tears welled up in my eyes, a mixture of relief and overwhelming emotion. I wasn't alone. They believed me. The collective digital embrace was a powerful antidote to weeks of isolation. Messages flooded my inbox. From strangers. Some offering words of comfort, others sharing their own harrowing tales, creating an instant, unexpected community of empathy and understanding. By midday, the numbers were staggering. The thread had hit 1 million views. News outlets were reaching out, asking for interviews, their requests piling up in my direct messages. Online communities dedicated to victim support were keen. Sharing my story, amplifying my voice far beyond my wildest expectations. The hashtags I had chosen, stalking awareness and my story, were trending, not just nationally, but globally, a digital wildfire spreading across Teendry. Continents. My carefully compiled evidence, once a solitary burden, was now being scrutinized and validated by millions, the indisputable proof that my experience was real and terrifying. The story was picked up by major news platforms, from reputable online journals to evening news segments. Articles were written discussing the prevalence of stalking and the often dismissive reactions victims face. My name, Riley Novak, became a symbol, a testament to the power of a single voice amplified by the internet, a rallying cry for those who felt invisible. The virality of the post wasn't just about my story, it was about the universal experience of being unheard, of having your boundaries violated and your fears dismissed. And the insidious way society often enabled such behavior by failing to acknowledge its severity. One tweet in particular seemed to capture the collective imagination. "They told me I was overreacting about my stalker, so I made a public post and it went viral." This simple sentence, a summary of my entire ordeal, resonated deeply. It encapsulated the frustration, the fight for validation, and the ultimate triumph of reclaiming my narrative. The irony of it, the fact that I had to go to such extreme lengths to be believed, was not lost on anyone. It became a powerful meme. A short but potent encapsulation of the systemic invalidation faced by countless victims. The comments section was a whirlwind of emotions. There were messages of anger towards Mark, of course, calls for justice, but also a tremendous outpouring of empathy and solidarity for me. People were sharing their own experiences, offering advice, and simply validating my feelings, creating a powerful digital community of curs. Support. It was overwhelming. In the best possible way. For weeks, I had felt invisible, my fears dismissed as theatrical, a burden to those around me. Now, I was seen, heard, and believed by millions. The silence had been shattered, replaced by a roar of collective validation that reverberated across the internet. And it was this roar that finally caught the attention of the authorities, proving that sometimes public pressure is the catalyst for official action. Justice Takes Notice. The phone call came on the third day after the thread went viral. It was an unfamiliar number, and my heart jumped into my throat as I answered, a mix of apprehension and eager anticipation coursing through me. "Hello, is this Riley Novak?" A calm, authoritative voice asked. "This is Detective Miller from the campus police department. We'd like to talk to you about your recent social media post." My breath hitched. This was it. The police were calling me, not the other way around. My carefully curated evidence, my raw, emotional narrative, amplified by millions of retweets and shares, had cut through the noise and landed directly on the desks of those who could actually help. A surge of relief, so potent it made my knees weak, washed over me. A physical manifestation of the release of weeks of pent-up terror. It was a vindication, a confirmation that I hadn't been screaming into a void. Detective Miller was incredibly professional and empathetic. She told me that while they routinely monitored social media for potential threats or concerns, my thread had been impossible to ignore due to its sheer virality and the undeniable evidence it presented. The sheer volume of public discourse it generated had made it a priority. They had already done some preliminary digging, cross-referencing Mark's name with university records and any previous complaints, even finding a few minor behavioral infractions that hadn't previously raised red flags, but now seemed significant in context. I recounted my story to Detective Miller, just as I had written it for the thread, but with even more detail, pulling up specific dates and times from my meticulously kept log. I shared the screenshots, the timestamps, the subtle videos, and even the internal notes about my emotional state. She listened patiently, taking copious notes, never once interrupting or dismissing my feelings, her expression one of serious understanding. Her validation was a balm to my raw nerves, a stark contrast to the casual dismissal I had faced from my family. She acknowledged the profound psychological impact of stalking, something my family had completely overlooked, and recognized the pervasive fear it had instilled in my daily life. "The evidence you've collected is incredibly thorough, Ms. Novak," she said, her voice serious, her gaze direct. "The timestamps, the messages, the photographs, they paint a very clear picture. This is not a case of awkward attention. This is a pattern of harassment and intimidation. You did everything right by documenting this." She explained the legal framework of stalking, how it didn't necessarily require physical violence to be a crime. The consistent pattern of unwanted contact, the emotional distress it caused, the reasonable fear for my safety, these were all key elements that constituted the offense. It was a revelation, a confirmation that my instincts had been right all along, and that the legal system actually recognized the very real danger I had been experiencing, even without overt threats. The detective assured me that they were taking this very seriously. They had already identified Mark, located his off-campus residence, and were in the process of building a stronger case for his arrest. She advised me to continue documenting any further incidents, though she sincerely hoped there wouldn't be any. She also offered comprehensive resources, including counseling services specialized in trauma, referrals to campus security for enhanced protective measures, and even explained options for an immediate temporary restraining order. The contrast between her professional, validating approach and my family's dismissiveness was stark and deeply, profoundly healing. It felt like the cavalry had finally arrived. The swift hand of justice, the police acted swiftly. Armed with the irrefutable digital trail I had provided, they launched a full-scale investigation. They gathered more information, interviewing other students who might have witnessed Mark's consistent presence or unusual behavior. They reviewed campus security footage, cross-referencing my log entries with surveillance camera timestamps, which confirmed his repeated appearances in specific locations at specific times. The digital evidence I had meticulously collected was an invaluable starting point, giving them concrete leads to follow and a clear timeline of his obsessive behavior. The fact that the story had gone viral also meant there was immense public pressure and scrutiny, ensuring a rapid and thorough response from the authorities. The university administration, likely reeling from the negative publicity, was also fully cooperative, providing access to any records that might assist the investigation. Less than a week after my post exploded, I received another call from Detective Miller. My heart hammered in my chest as I saw her name on the caller ID. "Ms. Novak," she said, her voice calm and firm, imbued with a quiet sense of triumph. "We have arrested Mark. He's currently being held for questioning, and charges are being prepared." The news hit me like a physical wave. Arrested. The word reverberated in my mind, a powerful culmination of weeks of fear, frustration, and desperate hope. A strange, overwhelming mix of relief, vindication, and a lingering tremor of disbelief washed over me. He was gone. The constant shadow that had loomed over my life, the pervasive sense of being watched, the chilling realization that my movements were being tracked, was finally lifted. It was as if a suffocating weight had been removed from my chest, allowing me to breathe freely for the first time in months. Detective Miller explained that Mark had been brought in for questioning, and based on the overwhelming evidence presented, along with corroborating information they had gathered, they had enough to charge him with multiple counts of harassment and stalking. He had apparently been utterly shocked and disbelieving, unaware of the extent to which his actions had been documented and publicized. He reportedly tried to dismiss it as just trying to get to know her, or misunderstanding her signals, but the sheer volume of evidence against him, particularly the digital trail I had created, was undeniable. His attempts to rationalize his behavior crumbled under the weight of concrete facts. The campus community was abuzz. The news of Mark's arrest spread like wildfire, a tangible outcome of the viral post. Students were talking, discussing the importance of listening to victims, the dangers of dismissing concerns, and the proactive steps individuals could take to protect themselves. It felt like a significant shift, a small but significant change in the campus culture regarding personal safety and boundaries, and a broader understanding of what constitutes unacceptable behavior. The university even released a statement acknowledging the incident and reiterating their commitment to student safety, a stark contrast to their initial silence. My social media, even after the arrest, remained a hub of support. People continued to share their own stories, asking for advice, expressing gratitude for my courage, and offering words of solidarity. I found myself in a new role, inadvertently becoming a voice for others who had felt similarly unheard. It was a heavy responsibility, but also incredibly empowering. I responded to as many messages as I could, offering words of encouragement, sharing resources from Detective Miller's initial list, and simply letting people know they weren't alone in their fear or their fight for validation. The global reach of my story allowed me to connect with survivors from different countries, highlighting the universal nature of this insidious issue. The subsequent legal proceedings were a blur of meetings with lawyers and brief appearances in court. I provided my detailed statement, presented my meticulously organized evidence, and watched as the justice system, finally, began to work on my behalf. Mark eventually pleaded guilty to harassment, avoiding a more severe stalking charge, which, while not a full victory, was still a significant outcome. The conviction was a public acknowledgement of his wrongdoing, a validation of my experience, and a promise that he would be held accountable for his actions. A permanent restraining order was issued, providing a legal barrier between us, a tangible boundary that had been so desperately missing before. The feeling of closure was immense. The fear, though not entirely gone, was significantly diminished, replaced by a profound sense of reclaiming my autonomy and my space. I could finally walk on campus without constantly scanning my surroundings, without the cold dread settling in my stomach. Reconciliation and rebuilding the most anticipated conversations, and in many ways, the most challenging, were those with my family. They had seen the news, of course. My viral post had made it impossible for them to ignore, dominating their news feeds and becoming a topic of local conversation. They called me, their voices tinged with a blend of concern, regret, and something that sounded suspiciously like awe, a realization of the magnitude of what I had faced. My sister, Maya, called first. Her voice was quiet, hesitant, almost fragile. "Riley," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, I saw your post. And the news. I'm so incredibly sorry. I really had no idea how serious it was. I feel awful that I didn't listen." I listened, a knot forming in my stomach, a mixture of lingering hurt and a cautious hope for reconciliation. It wasn't an easy conversation. "It was serious, Maya," I said, my voice steady, no longer trembling with the desperation I'd felt weeks ago. "And I told you it was. I needed you to believe me." "I know," she sighed, a sound of genuine contrition. And I dismissed you. I told you you were overreacting, being dramatic. I feel terrible about that. I should have listened. I should have believed you, no matter what. There's no excuse for my reaction." Her apology sounded genuine, laced with remorse and a newfound understanding. She recounted how she had seen some of the evidence, the undeniable screenshots and log entries, and how it had hit her just how truly unsettling and pervasive his actions had been. She even admitted to having felt a similar sense of unease once, in a past situation, and how her own dismissal of it had made her regret not taking it more seriously. This newfound understanding, born from the undeniable public validation of my experience, was a small comfort, a fragile bridge beginning to form between us. My parents' call came a few hours later. My mom's voice was tearful, overflowing with apologies, raw with emotion. "Oh, Riley, my brave girl," she sobbed. "We were so wrong. We didn't understand the gravity of it. We thought we were protecting you by telling you not to worry, by making it seem small. But we just made you feel alone and unheard. How could we have been?" "So blind?" My dad, usually so stoic and composed, sounded unusually subdued, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother and I have been talking. A lot," he said, his voice unusually soft. "We truly regret not listening to you more closely. We should have taken your fears seriously from the start. You were right all along, and we're incredibly proud of how you handled this. How you stood up for yourself, how you fought for your safety when we failed to adequately support you." End quote. It was a full, unreserved apology, a complete turnaround from their previous dismissiveness. They asked about the police investigation, about my well-being, about whether I needed anything at all, offering to drop everything and come visit me immediately. They offered to bring me home for a break, to just be there, to provide any comfort I might need. It was a stark contrast to their previous advice of, "Don't make a big deal out of nothing." Now, the big deal had been undeniably validated by millions of people, and by the legal system itself, forcing them to confront their own blind spots. The conversations were difficult, laden with unspoken apologies and the sting of past invalidation. There were moments of quiet pain, where I felt the echoes of their earlier dismissal. But they were also incredibly cathartic. It wasn't about seeking revenge or demanding an apology. It was about finally being heard, finally having my reality acknowledged and respected by the people who mattered most to me. The shift in their perspective was palpable. The constant refrain of dramatic or overreacting had been silenced, replaced by a quiet respect for my strength and resilience and a profound sense of regret for their initial failure to see my distress. In the aftermath, our family dynamic slowly began to heal. There was a newfound openness, a deeper understanding that some fears, even if they seem irrational from an outsider's perspective, are deeply valid and require careful listening and unwavering belief. My parents, particularly, became more attuned to my emotional well-being, checking in regularly, not with dismissive advice, but with genuine concern and empathy, asking how I felt, how I was coping. Maya, too, became a stronger ally, advocating for others who might be facing similar situations, often citing my story as a powerful example of what happens when voices are ignored and fears are minimized. This public validation had forced them to confront their own biases, and in doing so, had paved a way for a more authentic and supportive relationship built on a foundation of trust and profound empathy. From victim to advocate, a new purpose. The ripple effects of my viral post extended far beyond my immediate family and the arrest of my stalker. The story became a case study, a powerful example of how online platforms could be used to expose wrongdoing and advocate for victims, demonstrating the unexpected power of collective digital action. Universities across the country began reviewing their policies on harassment and stalking, prompted by the public outcry and the sheer visibility of my experience, realizing the inadequacy of their existing protocols. News articles and online discussions continued to highlight the often overlooked psychological impact of stalking, pushing for a broader, more nuanced understanding of what constitutes harassment beyond mere physical violence. I found myself increasingly invited to speak, to share my story with student groups, at conferences dedicated to victim advocacy, and even on podcasts focusing on social justice. It was daunting at first, to relive such a traumatic experience over and over, dissecting the moments of fear and vulnerability. But each time, I found renewed purpose. I wasn't just Riley, the victim I was. Riley, the advocate, the voice for those who had been silenced, a beacon of hope for those navigating similar nightmares. I spoke about the importance of trusting your gut, of meticulously documenting everything, and of not letting anyone, not even your closest family, invalidate your fears. I emphasized that self-preservation instinct is a powerful, reliable compass. I also became more involved with anti-stalking organizations, lending my voice and my platform to their cause. I helped them craft effective social media campaigns, advised on messaging that would resonate with a wider audience, and actively participated in their awareness initiatives. It was a way of transforming my painful experience into something positive, a force for change that extended far beyond my personal situation. The thousands of messages I continued to receive, from people sharing similar stories of dismissal and fear, fueled my determination, proving that my experience was not an isolated incident, but part of a pervasive societal problem. I realized that my story wasn't just mine. It was a reflection of a systemic issue, a testament to how often victims are disbelieved until it's too late, until the danger becomes undeniable. My academic life eventually returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the experience undeniably changed me. I was more vigilant, yes, constantly aware of my surroundings, but also more resilient, my newfound strength forged in adversity. I learned to trust my instincts implicitly, to prioritize my safety and well-being above all else. I finished my degree, graduating with honors, a testament to my ability to overcome profound adversity and excel despite the immense psychological strain. The dark cloud that had loomed over my university years had dissipated, replaced by a sense of empowered purpose and a clear vision for my future. The incident also profoundly shaped my career path. I found myself drawn irrevocably to advocacy, to social justice, to finding tangible ways to empower marginalized voices and effect systemic change. I interned at a legal aid clinic during my final year, focusing specifically on victims' rights and harassment cases, realizing the immense power of legal intervention. I began to consider pursuing a law degree, seeing it not just as a profession, but as a crucial tool for fighting injustice. The fire that had been ignited by my desperate need for validation had now transformed into a passionate, unwavering commitment to justice. The process of writing my final year thesis was grueling but incredibly rewarding. I delved deep into legal precedents, analyzed case studies of stalking and harassment, and interviewed legal experts, victim advocates, and even law enforcement officials. I discovered that while laws existed, their implementation was often inconsistent, and victims frequently faced significant hurdles in seeking justice due to lack of understanding or insufficient resources. My thesis proposed several key reforms, including clearer, more comprehensive definitions of stalking behaviors to encompass digital forms of harassment, enhanced training for law enforcement personnel to better recognize and respond to these incidents, and crucially, increased funding for victim support services to address the long-term psychological and financial impacts. It also emphasized the importance of early intervention and preventative measures, arguing that societal attitudes needed to shift to recognize the gravity of stalking before it escalated into more dangerous forms. I presented my thesis with a profound sense of purpose, knowing that it was not just an academic exercise, but a blueprint for real-world impact, a potential contribution to a more just and responsive legal system. The public speaking engagements grew more frequent, sometimes leading to opportunities on national television programs and major news channels. These appearances allowed me to reach an even wider audience, bringing the issue of stalking into mainstream conversations in a way that my initial viral post had only scratched the surface of. I used these platforms to debunk common myths, such as the dangerous idea that victims provoke their stalkers, or that stalking is a romantic pursuit. I explained the crucial difference between unwanted attention and genuine romantic interest, highlighting the elements of fear, control, and intimidation that define stalking. I also stressed the importance of bystander intervention, encouraging friends, family, and community members to take concerns seriously and offer unwavering support, emphasizing that silence can be as harmful as direct action. These television appearances were intense, often requiring me to revisit painful memories in front of a national audience. But I always felt that the potential for positive impact outweighed the personal discomfort. Emotional toll. My personal life continued to undergo subtle but significant shifts. The heightened awareness of my surroundings, a lingering consequence of the stalking, never entirely disappeared. I found myself instinctively scanning crowds, noting exits, and being more cautious about sharing personal information online, a new baseline of vigilance. However, this hypervigilance was no longer paralyzing fear. It was a conscious awareness, a protective instinct born from experience, not a crippling anxiety. I also became more discerning about who I let into my inner circle, prioritizing genuine connection, unwavering support, and authentic empathy. My existing friendships deepened as we shared a collective understanding of my journey, and I formed new bonds with individuals who understood and respected my mission. The conversations with my family also continued to evolve. The initial wave of apologies had long subsided, replaced by a quiet, consistent demonstration of their support that transcended mere words. They attended some of my public speaking events, sitting in the audience with proud, tearful eyes, a tangible display of their commitment. They shared my website with their friends and colleagues, advocating for my cause within their own networks, becoming unexpected champions of my work. My mom, in particular, became a fierce advocate for listening to women's voices, often sharing her own regret and growth with others, using her own story as a cautionary tale. My dad, ever the protector, made it a point to educate himself on digital safety and security measures, often sending me articles and research he found relevant to my work, demonstrating his engagement. Beyond surface-level support. Maya, my sister, became one of my most local champions, actively sharing my content, defending me against any online negativity, and even brainstorming new outreach strategies. Our relationship, once marred by that initial dismissal, had transformed into a bond of profound respect and mutual support, forged in the crucible of adversity. The support from my university, too, evolved beyond the initial police involvement. They established a dedicated task force to review campus safety protocols, incorporating many of my recommendations into their official guidelines. They implemented mandatory training for all staff and faculty on identifying and responding to stalking behaviors, ensuring that no student would face the same dismissive response I had. They also created a more accessible and streamlined reporting system for students, ensuring that concerns were taken seriously from the outset, with clear pathways to support. I was invited to serve on an advisory board for this task force, contributing my insights and advocating for student voices, ensuring that the policies were survivor-centered and truly effective. It was a powerful acknowledgement of my impact, a testament to the fact that my single public post had triggered systemic change within the institution itself, creating a safer environment for future generations of students. The entire experience, while traumatic, had forged in me a resilience and a sense of purpose I never knew I possessed. I had faced a terrifying adversary, battled dismissal and disbelief, and emerged not only stronger, but also committed to making a profound difference for others. The viral post was not just a fleeting moment of internet fame, it was the catalyst that transformed my life, turning a deeply personal struggle into a powerful movement for change, a ripple effect that spread far beyond my immediate sphere. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with a single, courageous act of defiance, amplified by the collective power of a connected world. The silence I had once endured had been shattered, replaced by a roar of voices demanding to be heard, and I was proud to be one of them, a testament to the power of a single individual's determination. My journey was far from over. It was just the beginning of a lifelong commitment to ensuring that no one else had to endure the agonizing feeling of being overreacted to, when their fears were, in fact, terrifyingly real. My story, once a whisper of fear, had become a resounding call to action, a testament to the unyielding power of truth. From law student to leading advocate, the period following my graduation and the full legal closure of Mark's case felt like both an ending and a new beginning. The immediate intensity of the crisis had faded, replaced by a more sustained and deliberate focus on my advocacy. I decided to take a gap year before fully committing to law school, dedicating this time to expanding my reach and impact in the anti-stalking movement. This decision was met with full support from my family, who by now understood the profound importance and necessity of my work. They even offered practical assistance, helping me set up my new office space and volunteering their time. One of my primary goals during this year was to develop a comprehensive educational toolkit for high schools. I realized that awareness needed to start much earlier, before young adults entered environments like university, where they might encounter complex social dynamics and potential dangers. I collaborated with a former professor, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a renowned sociologist specializing in youth behavior and digital citizenship. Together, we crafted a curriculum that covered the nuances of healthy relationships, digital boundaries, consent, and the early warning signs of unhealthy or obsessive behavior. The toolkit included interactive workshops, discussion guides, and real-life case studies, including an anonymized version of my own experience, designed to foster empathy and critical thinking among DASHA students. We incorporated role-playing scenarios and open forums to encourage active participation and critical dialogue, ensuring the lessons resonated deeply with young people. The process of developing this toolkit was intellectually stimulating and emotionally demanding. We meticulously researched adolescent psychology, consulting with educators, school counselors, and even focus groups of high school students to ensure the content was relevant, age-appropriate, engaging. We debated the best ways to present sensitive topics, ensuring that the material was informative without being alarmist or triggering. The goal was empowerment, not fear-mongering, equipping young people with the tools to identify and address harmful behaviors before they escalated. I drew heavily on my own past regrets, particularly the moments when I dismissed my own instincts, to highlight the importance of self-trust and communication for young people navigating complex relationships. We pilot-tested the toolkit in several local high schools, and the feedback was incredibly encouraging. Students were actively engaged, asking thoughtful questions and openly sharing their experiences, many of which echoed my own early concerns about unwanted attention or persistent digital contact. Teachers reported a noticeable increase in open communication among students about personal boundaries and safety concerns, and a reduction in peer-on-peer digital harassment. The success of the pilot program led to a significant grant from a National Education Foundation, allowing us to expand the toolkit's reach to schools across the state, and, eventually, nationwide. This was a monumental step, turning a deeply personal mission into a structured, scalable educational initiative that could impact countless young lives. Beyond the educational sphere, I continued to engage actively with policymakers. My thesis on stalking laws became a foundational document in several legislative discussions, cited by legal scholars and politicians alike. I testified repeatedly before state legislative committees, sharing my personal story alongside my rigorous research findings and compelling statistics. I argued passionately for stronger digital stalking laws, recognizing that much of modern stalking occurs online and through technological means, often outpacing existing legal frameworks. I advocated for increased funding for victim services, emphasizing the long-term psychological, emotional, and often financial burdens that stalking victims often face, including counseling, relocation, and assistance, and legal aid. It was a slow, arduous process, navigating the complexities of political bureaucracy and overcoming resistance from various lobbies, but I was determined. I learned the critical importance of persistence, of building broad coalitions, and of translating deeply personal experiences into compelling, data-driven legislative arguments that could influence policy. My online presence also continued to evolve and expand. My website became a dynamic forum for guest blogs from other survivors, therapists specializing in trauma, and legal experts, creating a diverse and authoritative voice for the movement. I hosted regular live Q sessions on social media, answering questions from a global audience about everything from dealing with online harassment to navigating the complexities of reporting to law enforcement in different jurisdictions. I even started a podcast, Unseen Shadows, Unsilenced Voices, where I interviewed experts, survivors, and activists, delving deeper into the psychological impact of stalking, the societal attitudes that enable it, and the diverse paths to healing and advocacy. The podcast allowed for more nuanced and in-depth conversations, providing a vital platform for complex discussions that couldn't be fully explored in short social media posts or brief news segments. The sheer volume and diversity of human stories I encountered through my advocacy work was both heartbreaking and profoundly inspiring. I heard from men and women, young and old, from diverse racial, socioeconomic, and cultural backgrounds, all united by the common thread of unwanted pursuit and the violation of personal safety. I learned that stalking was not limited to romantic obsession. It could stem from workplace disputes, academic rivalries, neighborly disagreements, or even casual encounters, highlighting the broad spectrum of EE